I don't want to put the cart before the horse. We don't have a strategy yet. There's no point in me asking for action on the part of Congress before I know exactly what it is that is going to be required for us to get the job done.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm John Downs in for Pat Bolland. Well, some action in northern Iraq, and it is good news for the Shia in that area. And essentially, that's what we're looking at from what we can tell. Americans playing a pretty significant role with airstrikes and trying to stop ISIS from moving through and grabbing more control in that region. Joining us to discuss this is Professor Robert George. He's with Princeton University and joins us on Skype. Professor, could you tell us how significant this victory is for the residents of this town of Amarillo?
Well, it's good news because it protects some innocent people. ISIS has been on a rampage, a literally genocidal rampage, murdering, committing horrible atrocities against innocent women and children, elderly people in Yazidi communities, Christian communities, and Shia Muslim communities. Indeed, also among Sunni Muslims who don't go along with the radical, extremist, violent ideology of ISIS. So some people who were very vulnerable just a short time ago are now, at least temporarily, more secure, and that's good news. But we need a lot more good news.
In this particular case, in this town, was it more than half of the people in the town are under the age of 15? Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's very common in that region, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a high birth rate, and number two, a lot of people die because of violence and disease at relatively young ages. So you put that together and you end up with an average age that's pretty low.
Could you give us the background? I mean, you used the term genocidal rampage. Why is there so much animosity here? And does it go both ways, or is it really from those with ISIS more so?
It's one way. I mean, this is one way. I mean, of course, there have been ancient, somewhat atavistic tensions between the different minority groups in that area. Although there have also been long periods of peace and even something approaching friendship between or among various communities. But what you have now really is something new. There's an error that a lot of people, I think, are committing, thinking of this as thinking of ISIS as a revival of a kind of Dark Ages movement, a Dark Ages religious movement. ISIS is not an 8th century movement. It is a 20th and 21st century movement. What's going on here is you have a totalitarian group, a group that's motivated by the same sort of totalitarian impulse, a very modern phenomenon that motivated the Nazis, that motivated the communists. The Nazis exploited the idea of nationality and nationalism to drive its recruiting and to drive its movement. The communists seized the idea of class and class consciousness and class conflict for the same purpose. Here, ISIS is doing this with religion, the Muslim faith. Now, despite the fact that they have been condemned by Muslims across the board, Shia, Sunni, Sufi, Ahmadiyya, Ismaili, this is a radical group that's got its own totalitarian agenda, which involves seizing power in the name of a Muslim caliphate that it proposes to establish throughout the Middle East, ultimately Saudi Arabia. And it's also threatened, let's remember, John, very credibly, these people do not threaten idly. When they make a threat, they intend to do it, to carry it out unless they're stopped. And they have threatened terrorist action on a massive scale in the United States and in Europe.
Well, when we come back, one of the things I want to talk about, I think one of the things a lot of people are worried about is where they're getting their forces from. So we'll address that when we return, because a lot of people are concerned they're getting them from your country and our country as well. So more with Robert George, more Straight Talk ahead. Back on Straight Talk, I'm John Downs for Pat Bolland. It's been almost 2 months that ISIS fighters have had control of a northern Iraqi town known as Amerli. Joining us to discuss a huge victory for residents of that town and possibly for other residents in that region, Robert George, a professor at Princeton University. Robert, one of the things we're wondering about as ISIS continues to claim victory, not in this case though, but throughout this region of Syria and northern Iraq, where are they getting their troops from? You'd think they would be spreading themselves thinner.
Yes, well, they're recruiting, of course, in the region where they're active, the region that they occupy. But we need to be soberly aware that they are also recruiting in Muslim communities abroad, including in continental Europe, in England, in the United States, where I am, and in Canada, where you are. They are very effective recruiters. They're adept at using social media. And you said something very true a moment ago, and that is that their victories are themselves powerful recruiting tools. I mentioned that what's driving ISIS is a kind of totalitarian impulse. It's really quite analogous to what we saw with the Nazis and the communists. The reason the Nazis and communists were able to recruit so many young men, fight really so valiantly, is the same reason ISIS is able to do that recruiting. Their victories feed a narrative that's very appealing to young men. That's the idea that to be part of a world transforming, history transforming movement, something that will change the way things have historically been done. A movement that's guided either by history itself in the case of communism or by God in the case of ISIS. And victories reinforce that narrative and improve their recruiting. The way to defeat the narrative is to defeat them on the battlefields. Defeats like the one they suffered just in the last number of hours help to send a message to potential recruits, again, mainly young men, send a message that, you know what, maybe God is not on your side. Maybe this is not a movement that will transform history and that you can be part of.
That seems rational, but very often when it comes to being able to recruit as many people as they do, they're not necessarily using logic in many cases. They're using that narrative, which is essentially world domination. If you've got such a bold goal as that, how do you actually, even if you can be victorious on many fronts, how do you actually stomp it out completely?
Well, only by defeating them decisively. I mean, I think here a high degree of sobriety is necessary. You cannot drive them back behind borders. They're not organized as a territorial or national community or entity. They are driven by an agenda. That agenda is an agenda of domination. You can't negotiate with them. They're not interested in negotiation. They're not interested in compromise. They are on a mission in the same way that the communists and the Nazis and other totalitarian movements were on missions. And so I'm afraid they're going to have to be defeated. Now, that's a very hard and difficult thing to say because nobody wants to commit more military force in that region of the world. And all of us would like to have a world of peace where we don't have to use the military. And we've suffered enough, we in the West, enough war weariness already. Things have not gone well for the United States and our allies in Iraq in the past. The public does not want American boots. The American public certainly doesn't. I'm sure the Canadian public doesn't want Canadian boots on the ground in Iraq. Now, I'm hoping that by providing the kind of military, air support, strategic support, intelligence support that is needed by the Kurds and the Shia and other fighters there, we will not need troops from the Anglosphere or from Europe on the ground. But we have to be sober about this. We're going to have to stop them with whatever it takes. So now let's do what we can do to supply the local forces that are doing the valiant fighting to defeat them, and hope that that will accomplish what needs to be accomplished. Also, let me add, there's desperate need for humanitarian support for the dislocated people, Yazidis, Christians, and others who are the victims of ISIS barbarity. So we need to intensify our airdrops of humanitarian supplies.
If they're recruiting through Europe, through Canada, through the United States, it sounds like this war, the front of this war, is actually on people's computers of young men. What kind of interventionist strategies do we use to try to prevent those young men and women from becoming interested?
One of the frightening things about ISIS is that they are better equipped, certainly better armed, they're better financed, and they're even more determined and brutal than Al-Qaeda was. Now we have to add that they're far more adept than Al-Qaeda and than most other movements, good or bad movements, at using social media, using modern media technology. Now, I think part of our task has to be to compete for the hearts and minds of the potential recruits that are out there. We need people, especially in the Muslim community, who do not like ISIS any more than non-Muslims do. to become involved in the public relations effort, in the campaign for hearts and minds, to try to win the very potential recruits that ISIS is trying to win. So we need to be adept at using social media too. Now that can't be something that the CIA does, or something that that Christians or other non-Muslims are in the lead in doing. Here we need Muslim leaders, religious leaders, cultural leaders, groups to step up to the plate, as I know many are doing, by the way. That's also good news. To get into the fight for hearts and minds. It's as much a hearts and minds fight as it is a fight on the battlefield.
We only have about 10 seconds left, but very quickly, where are they getting their funding?
Various sources. One, from their raids on the oil fields. Two, from banditry and kidnapping. They're very good at using those old-fashioned funding techniques, as good at that as they are as using modern technology. What I'm not sure about, one hears rumors, but I'm not sure about, is whether there are individuals or even regimes that are secretly funneling money. One hears rumors. I don't want to advance those rumors. I'm not in a position to say that they're true, but I do worry about that, as I think anybody would.
Can't be a huge surprise.
From the oil raids and banditry and kidnapping, that's bank robbing, it's good sources of money for them.
Well, Robert, thank you very much for being part of the program today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Robert George, professor at Princeton University.